moments ago, you asked, who would be a commissioner, right? I mean, somebody's not just going to appear that everyone would listen to. In lieu of all that, I think the commissioner of college football is Greg Sankey. He sounds like one. He looks like one. And it does appear he holds a lot of cards. I understand there's the Big Ten still as well, having just brought in, having turned right here Los Angeles into Big Ten country. But Sankey, absolutely is leading the conversation about college football playoffs and things of that nature. What did you learn from SEC Media Week, Pete Thamel?
Well, I think I learned that if you're going to be Big Ten country in LA, you should get Big Ten weather 3 months a year.
Hey, sorry. Hard pass, sir. Hard pass. I'll take turned leaves, but other than that,
Slate skies and cold winds right down Sunset.
Right.
What I learned from SEC media is interesting, right? Like we're in this era of a power two, and I'm certainly not afraid to call it that because that's what the finances dictate. And I'm sitting here at ACC Media Day doing this interview, so I'll probably get some dirty looks from the folks outside the so-called gated communities, as Jim Phillips called them yesterday. But and the Greg Sankey versus Kevin Warren dynamic is going to be a dynamic that shapes the future of the whole sport, just like Mike Slive and Jim Delaney did, in a past generation. The Sankey Warren dynamic is more adversarial than maybe the Slive Delaney dynamic was, and it's very interesting. Each of those leagues obviously is primarily tied to a large cable television network or large television network, so that obviously adds to some of the intrigue around this stuff, Rich. But my takeaway from SEC media is, look, they've won 12 of the last 16 national titles, and I think Clemson, Ohio State, and Florida State won. Clemson won 2, and those were the other ones. So they are the dominant league, and the statistics certainly dictate that. And when Michigan goes and lays a dinosaur egg in the playoff like they did last year, Rich, it doesn't help that dynamic. So that was a joke. But
it fell flat. It fell flat.
I could tell.
It fell flat, Pete. But the imagery is vivid, no question about it. So the question is the SEC says they're not looking to expand, right? And so have we just seen the seismic movement of 2022, or is there more to come? What do you see from that?
Interesting question. I've been writing that we're in a period of peace until that period ends, right? Like there's no movement until there is, and the dynamic of like there's a clear moat between the Power 2 leagues and everybody else, and I don't think we're going to see a flurry of movement next week from those two in particular. But I think to sit here and say in 5 years they're not going to be at 20 would be naive too. Like they're going to move at some point, and it's a little bit like spy versus spy. There's binoculars in suburban Chicago, and there's binoculars in Birmingham, and they're peering at each other constantly. And the available, viable, and profitable chess pieces are few. So Notre Dame obviously being the primary among those, and then if each is going to add 4 to keep round numbers, it's not like a list of 30 they're picking from, right? It's the 2 Pacific Northwest schools, and then there's sort of your menu du jour of ACC schools, and that's obviously a thicket of the grant of rights, which I won't bore your listeners with legal jargon, but basically it will be expensive and legally risky for schools to leave the ACC in the next 14 years. That's not to say one won't do it within that 14-year period of time, but I don't see anyone imminently taking that up. So there's pressure on the ACC now to find new ways to generate revenue. So,
wow.
But yeah, long story short, like the next move is going to be dictated in large part by whoever wants to, feels the need to grab properties deemed valuable. So that is, long and short. Like North Carolina to me is fascinating because they're one of the few schools that would actually fit in both leagues, that would be desired by both leagues. There's I think it's the 9th biggest state in the country, the Charlotte, Raleigh market. There's good players in the state of North Carolina, very, very good players in the state of North Carolina. And it's a great brand, right? UNC. Basketball is very good, which probably matters 15% of the whole thing, but it certainly doesn't hurt to have the Heels playing on a Monday night in April. That's a good thing. And, UNC football has been generally irrelevant for the last generation. But Mac Brown has recruited well. They haven't necessarily played well the last 2 years, but you could see them, playing Penn State in the Big Ten, and you could also see them playing South Carolina. Right?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you choose North Carolina out of all this. Like Clemson is the first one on everyone's lips, right? And then now
Sure.
Miami with Mario Cristobal there, bouncing the turnover chain, and you got Florida State, right? I mean, so
sure.
why?
Well, I just think geographically, right?
Yeah,
it fits in both, and I don't necessarily know if you can see Clemson in the Big Ten, right? And that's not knocking Clemson. They have earned on the field more than anybody in the sport, not named Alabama, in the last decade. So but there is, I roll my eyes at myself when I mention this, but there is AAU schools, and the Big Ten still does have a bit of snobbery, despite offering you a degree, Rich. They still hold themselves to some high standards up there. So, fit in presidents and all that stuff does become important. So, but I just bring up Carolina because I could see that being one coveted by both places, but more so not wanting the other one to get it. Does that make sense?
Sure, of course. I mean, that's the battle that you talk about, the spy versus spy.
Yes.
Great Mad Magazine reference that you mentioned between the SEC's home office and the Big Ten's home office. And just because I know, Pete Thamel, you're a journalist of the highest order, the Big Ten offered me 2 degrees. I went to Northwestern graduate school. Just wanted to make sure you understood that. That might sound like a humble brag, but this is all in the spirit of accuracy, Pete.
Yes.
Okay.